All right. Is this thing on?
It's
Mic
on.
check.
Okay.
One,
Mic
two.
check. 1, 2. Okay.
1, 2, 1, 2.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is episode 0 of the Shoot Punch Kick podcast. And what is this podcast about? This is going to be a nostalgic journey through 80s and early 90s action, horror, and sci-fi films. And this is the place where we overthink and overanalyze the best and worst from the golden age of genre cinema, from blockbusters to B movies and everything in between. So if you miss movies with big fucking explosions, insane body counts, and absolutely no redeeming social value, this is the show for you. That's right. All right. So I guess let's kick it off with some introductions.
All right. So you want to go first? Who are you aside from the narrator of badass intros?
All right. Who is I am? So I'm Telly. I am. We're all. I guess off the top, we're three of us have known each other for like how many years has it been? Oh my god, like 30 some odd years back in the day in Brooklyn. And yeah, and I'm just looking for a place to talk about films because I'm getting old and all the young people around me have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about.
No one gets the references.
No, and people are like, "Who? What? Why? Netflix? DVDs? What?
DVDs.
Yeah,
Like my dad used to watch.
VHS tapes? Yeah."
Carlos, you want to go?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Carlos. I'm a lover of kung fu flicks, action movies with a lot of blood, and just talking films, shooting the shit with two of my best friends from childhood.
And I'm Dash. That's not a clever name. That's my actual name. And I like things with explosions, guns that never have to reload. A lot of the movies that I'll probably talk about are the ones that like really touched me from when I was going to like Times Square every weekend and things that just kind of stood out. So looking forward to talking about these old movies with my dudes here.
That's exactly what I mean. See, going to Times Square, like people our age knows what that means, as opposed to like these days, going to Times Square means something completely different.
Well, it's nuts.
It's dangerous.
I feel like the one cool thing about Times Square is not a lot of people talk about The Last Action Hero with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and like they show Times Square a little bit in like Taxi Driver and some other movies, but I feel like that was the last like real look at old 42nd Street, because the theater that he goes into is one of those like grindhouse movies there. And I remember like when I was younger, it wasn't open, but you could tell because the door had this kind of like lion like statue on it, and I would pass by and I was always like, oh man, I wish I went into like the Arnold Schwarzenegger one. But yeah, Times Square then was that was the real like movie cap as far as I'm concerned. Maybe not officially.
Yeah, I think it's really odd too that we're like pining for a time where you'd go into a movie theater and there would be a bunch of people smoking. It was fogged up in there, or mice that would running across, skitter scatter past your feet. I don't understand why I'm missing a time where basically going to the movies was a shitty experience, kind of comfort wise, but like culturally it was just so much fun, and like the people you meet, everybody in that theater is into the same thing. I really miss it.
Yeah.
What was
what was the first movie you guys saw in a movie theater?
Well, for me, it was Ghostbusters 2.
Really?
I think, and I remember because I had like the actual proton pack in the theater, and it made this sound. It was like, it didn't sound like the movie, but when it wasn't like a sound recording or everything, it's just some sort of like mechanical thing that would go like, ring! Like it was just annoying. And I remember they were like, "Yo, chill." You just in the middle of the movie.
Somebody get this kid out of here. Whose man's is this?
Yeah, exactly.
For me, it's funny actually. So my mother went into labor while in line to watch Empire Strikes Back with my father. With my father, and it was my father and my uncle were in line. And apparently, this is back when that movie was such a big hit that there were lines to get in there. And the funny thing is, my mom's water breaks. My father and my mom rush to the hospital. My uncle stays at the theater. to watch Star Wars. But the first movie that I can remember actually being in the theater for was Life Force.
Life Force.
And
Wow. I
yeah,
think that's a
because
movie for kids, right? With
my uncle was one of the major reasons why I love, movies. And he used to get a kick out of making me watch scary movies. And he would use it as a way to like reprimand me as well. Like, if you keep acting up, I'm going to put on American Werewolf in London. Like that was the worst thing or Killer Clowns from Outer Space. That was the worst thing you could do for me as a kid.
Well, I had a similar experience. My first movie was a film called 10 to Midnight, which is a Charles Bronson movie about
Yeah,
him hunting a serial killer that likes to get naked and murder women. So seeing that as a 6-year-old kid or 5-year-old kid in the theaters scared the living crap out of me. So, but
that's
that
awesome.
really, I think that, yeah, it changed my life just because it was so incredibly like frightening for a child to experience that because you just don't even know like why is he killing these people, why is he getting naked, you know.
Yeah.
uh so
You didn't
but I think
understand the inner politics of the city at 5 years old?
no, I it's just my dad took me, he took my mom, I think he took my sister who was a year younger than me, and because he was a big Charles Bronson fan. But I think that movie imprinted two things on me: a lifelong love of Charles Bronson and also horror movies.
Hmm.
The
Yeah, it's
crossover
funny.
we didn't know we needed.
I
Yes.
remember it again vaguely in the fog of my memory at that Life Force screening. I spent, I think, a lot of the time hiding, like between my uncle's legs. Mind you, again, we're in the crappy movie theaters at the time with mice and people smoking, like underneath his legs, hiding. But then there's certain parts of that movie, Life Force, where there's some nudity, right? And I remember definitely very
A
vaguely
lot of
popping my head
nudity.
up, and that all of a sudden there's full frontal, and this woman is absolutely beautiful. I do remember very clearly being there for that, and then just not there for the rest. I think that at one point she's just like slowly walking towards this one guy, and she goes to kiss him, and then when she kisses him, it does the Indiana Jones, the right. He chose poorly by kissing her. And
Yeah.
then indelibly for the rest of my life, though, I'm always really concerned first kissing the girl because who knows what might happen.
Listen, it might be, it just hasn't happened yet. Not saying that it
Exactly.
can't happen. It just hasn't happened yet.
Did you ever see The Kiss from like
No.
1988? It's a horror movie, and it's about this
Yeah,
like
with
yeah,
vampire, or was that
Joanna
vampire?
Pacula. It's like voodoo, like some kind of shit or something. Yeah, but it was about like a woman that kisses people and transfers their soul over or something
Ah,
like that. It's a good movie.
There
yeah,
must have
maybe we
been
should put it on
something
a
going on
list.
in the 80s where a couple people were having this idea where they're like, look,
1988 or
man,
something. Yeah,
I
maybe
mean,
Marilyn
again, you got to
Salinger
figure
was in
the
it.
time that was the AIDS epidemic, right? So I mean, I feel
Yeah.
like in the collective unconscious, the fear of kind of sex, and that's a major trope too in a lot of the slasher films. A little bit earlier on, right? It was like who got
Hmm.
killed first? Whoever the teenagers having sex,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So.
written by Virgin. Like,
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm not dying. So I think with these and this like time period of very specific of like mid 70s, early 80s, kind of a cutoff in the 90s, I think where like we all feel that the film kind of changed overall. So why are we talking about this genre with these kind of, I don't want to call them limits because I feel like they're like, I know mostly we'll talk about like 80s and 90s, but I feel like your taxi drivers, your death wishes, your black exploitations and grindhouse movies might come into the mix. So what are like with this time period, what are your favorite things? Like why does this era of cinema stand out to you?
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead,
I'll
Carlos.
start. Oh,
Oh,
Carlos, go for it.
look like you had something to say.
All right, yeah. So I'll start. Again, there's a bunch of different reasons why this time period of film is special for me. Trying to bring it down to two is a little tough, but a couple of things that come to mind first. Well, first of all, is the use of practical effects. So what does that mean? Well, so Webster's dictionary. I'm just joking. I'm not going to do that. But basically, practical effects is anything that any kind of special effects that doesn't include the use of computers to make that happen, right? And so, this is a time before that becomes even really a viable option. So it could be anything from animatronic monsters to squibs being used for gunshots to miniatures being used for spaceships. And for me, the reason why that's such a valuable thing is that, quite frankly, even at the time that we're at now, with all of the sophistication we have with CG, I still don't think that CG looks as good as some of the things that we were watching practical effects wise from our childhood. So like, I would pick Puppets in Labyrinth over Avatar any day. When I'm watching Avatar, I feel like I'm watching a cartoon. Whereas when you're watching something like Labyrinth, they look real in the world, right? And the way they interact, something about the lighting and stuff. And even now, the better the technology gets, the more sophisticated our eyes become on being able to catch some of this stuff, right? So, I think a really great example, again, to this point is recently I was out flipping through the channels. Do you guys remember about 10 years ago, MGM was trying to do this whole MonsterVerse thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the movies was Van Helsing. So
Wasn't
Van
that
Helsing
part of
comes
it?
on. I think that was supposed to be
Well,
one of the start
they
of
tried to
the
do that a couple of times.
Because the one
yeah,
I
the
You're
remember
talking
Mummy,
was
way back. You're
Tom
talking
Cruise,
about
the
like
Mummy.
the Hugh Jackman Van Helsing.
the one, yeah,
Mhm.
that one. So that was on, and in that movie, there's a lot of scenes where a person turns into a werewolf, and I'm watching it, and at first I'm like, this looks terrible. And even video games today, this movie's only 10 years ago. This just pulls me out immediately. And I remember being in the theater thinking the same thing. So again, as part of like just an experiment and some research for the podcast, I went ahead and looked at American Werewolf in London, right?
Mhm.
A Rick Baker classic. And when watching that, even today, these movies are 30 years apart. The transformations in American Werewolf in London just completely trash anything that I saw in Van Helsing, right? And it's responsible for some of the most iconic images that we could think about, right? Like, in Terminator 1, the exoskeleton coming out of the fire,
Mhm.
right? Or like E.T. with the touch, right? And if you try to do any of those things, like if you look at old Yoda in Star Wars and Yoda in the remakes or in the prequels, right? It's a very different thing. So I don't know, just it lends to a realism, and it makes it easier for me to stay kind of focused in on the movie, and I'm not taken out of it the second I see something CG. I think the first time I noticed it really bad was in Blade 2, where there was a
Oh
fight
yeah,
scene
yeah.
going on, right? And then all of a sudden I'm like, man, that's not Wesley Snipes. Like, I want to see Wesley Snipes on some strings, man. Like, get this crap out of here.
Well, that
So I
movie
mean,
did like a really weird. There was one thing where, like, I think at that time they had a lot of movies that were like they didn't under. I don't know if it was like a CG thing, but they like how they addressed gravity was
mhm.
weird. So
The
like,
animation, the movement too, like
Yeah.
yeah, like the characters didn't have weight when they would fly around, so they would just
Yeah,
be
they didn't get the
flying everywhere.
physics yet. They certainly didn't have
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
yeah, so I mean, again, and also it's created more like iconic box art too. Like I'm reminded of like the box art for like the Ghoulies. Like, you couldn't, if you tried to make Ghoulies now and you did it with CG, it would feel like a cartoon and just wouldn't. I wouldn't bring out the same kind of, or like Critters. It just
Mhm.
wouldn't be the same. So again, for me, first and foremost, I think practical effects is a differentiator that, like, it's kind of a lost art. Even today, if you look at some of the stuff from like I think it's Greg Nicotero on who does the Walking Dead stuff. He does
Mhm.
some really, really great stuff with zombies using practical effects. But sometimes for some of the kills, they try to mix CG in with the practical effects. And anytime he does it, I instantly catch it and it instantly pulls me out. So, I mean, again, for me, number one is practical effects. I don't know. Do we want to just do one each and kind of round
Yeah, I
robin it, or
mean,
should I give them both?
no, you talk about it, but and Telly, if it makes you think of anything, but like this whole thing with the practical effects, it kind of makes me feel like kind of the way like AI is to a little bit of a degree of like when you saw something back in the day, you had like a kind of unwritten contract with the people watching it, right? So if you watched, Terminator or, Aliens, and you saw an alien, in your mind, you're like, they did something there
Yeah.
while filming to create
Yeah.
that kind of situation where now that, you're just like, for people that don't know how film works or whatever the case, you're just like, oh, computer. Like, you kind of like plug it in and you lose that kind of like magic element of like
Exactly. Yeah.
knowing Stan Winston made an animatronic. Like, and it's, some of it might be like rose colored glasses or like hindsight 2020 of like, I remember like I rewatched Total Recall. And I remember like, how did they make Arnold Schwarzenegger's face expand when he's in Mars and he
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
breathe? And then I watch it now and I'm like, all
It looks
right,
terrible.
Yeah, it looks like a
clearly,
balloon. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, but if they did it with CG, I think it would. I still think if they try to make that shot happen with CG, it wouldn't look as good as the ridiculousness. And also, just
Yeah.
even the concept, their eyes were bulging out, and then they get a little bit of air, and then their eyes just come right back, and they're like, "Oh man, I'm glad I got air right now."
Yeah, I think just overall, like I do like the feeling of that like human foot fingerprints on a scene of like, knowing someone. Like I remember as a kid, like seeing the actual Ninja Turtles like come to
Mm-hmm.
life with the Jim Henson, and you're just like that. Like as a kid, you're just like, yo, I could hug that, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like all of those things. You're like, I can touch that. And some of the stuff I think is like, the Jurassic Park is like one of those examples of like, I'll forgive it. Like, it's a 50,000 foot T-Rex, but when you see them, there's that scene where they're like with the Triceratops and they're touching it, and I think that might be a Stan Winston thing. You're like, that's a fucking real dinosaur. Like
Yeah.
I'm in this right now.
Yeah, and it gives you like reference for like height and sizes, right? Ninja Turtles thing, right? Like you're looking at the cartoon and you see April O'Neil, but you don't really know if April O'Neil's tall or if she's short or whatever. But then, so you can't use her to compare how tall the turtles are.
Yeah,
And all
yeah.
of a sudden now you're seeing live action and you're like, wow, if I saw a fucking turtle that was a 5'7" turtle walking towards me, this is how how does he get his shell through the doors and stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it
yeah.
just adds a certain level of realism and physics that I feel like is missing
Yeah.
today.
Telly, what do you got?
Yeah,
Why?
well, I agree with all of you. I think, what you said, Dash, is about the feeling the fingerprint on the film, and really, for me, it's really seeing the director's vision and feeling it was kind of less compromised as it is now, because movies today just feel so polished, and there was more of a indie DIY spirit back in the day, even for the studio films. And obviously, nostalgia is a huge part of it. The films you watch when you're a little kid, as I was saying before, that just leaves something in you, that the magic that you feel, for better or worse, is something that just sticks with you. And I think that's probably where our fascination with film and our love of film started, right? Because of watching these movies from back in the day. So it only makes sense that we go back to them. And I think
Nice.
I think the rewatch value of those movies are amazing, because that's the fact that we're buying multiple editions of them, and collecting them, and still watching them to this day, movies that are 30, 40 years old, says a lot about just the entertainment value of the films
Mhm.
from the 80s and 90s.
Do you find that
Yeah.
like more of
Early
like a story
90s.
thing? Is that like a story thing, or do you think it's just like an
Well, yeah,
overall?
a story thing, because those films are a bit slower back then, more character development, more deliberate, and nowadays it just feels things are kind of written, produced, and directed by committee, and you
Mhm.
kind of know the formulas, right? And you kind of much more predictable. Films that I picked as like my three favorites today, like they have they have surprise endings, and I feel like you
Mhm.
don't get that too much these days. You just have like things being teed up for the next episode or the
The
next
sequel.
sequel. Yeah, that might never happen,
Every,
which drives me
everything's got
nuts.
to be a franchise. Everything's got to have
Right.
hooks on the front and back end for franchises. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes you'll get something that's like, that doesn't succeed, like your Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Like,
Hmm.
if that's your favorite movie, the Fincher version, you're not going to know what happens to any of these
Right.
characters going forward, because they clearly thought this was going to be the one, and they only made one.
Well,
So
there was
that's
a follow up, right? But that wasn't technically a sequel.
was it a Fincher
Yeah,
one?
there was another film, not Fincher didn't direct it. No one came back for it, but it was another film based on the original series
That's
that did
wild
come
because they
out
already had
afterwards.
the Millennium Trilogy,
Yeah.
the foreign version, but
Mm-hmm.
someone picked it up. Because that's one of those scenarios of like same thing with I like the Dark Tower books with by Stephen King. And they came out with that's an 8-book series, 7 or 8 books, and they came out with the one, and they were like, "All right,
Idris, what are you doing?
you're
Yeah, it
gonna
was really bad.
find out what happens." And the thing that's wild with them is like they'll change the stories, so you can't even just be like, "All right, let me read books 2 through whatever," because now that one doesn't make sense, in the whole thing. So it was like, cool, you kind of took a stab at this one kind of element. But one of the things that Telly was making me think of is like the whole like twist endings and so the kind of like these movies. I felt like there was so much style injected in them that they felt like worlds, where I think that there's such a desire to like make realistic movies, right? So like, you watch Dark Knight's not a good example, but I feel like the Avengers, kind of like the MCU, there's like a realism to it. Like, and I know that they're fantastical and a lot of stuff, but there's like a style to like how they depict New York and how they do these things where
Mm-hmm.
they don't have they're not, they don't feel cinematic. They don't feel a way of like, I watched Death Wish recently, and it was like very that painting of New York, of what it means, of like he's constantly interacting with like the worst people in society. And it's like when you take like a scenario, like if you look at, if I ask for like, give me a couple of attributes of the world of a Marvel movie, or, like a general movie, like the city themselves, like, it's kind of a cliche to say like, oh, the real character is New York, in like
Mm-hmm.
Death Wish or whatever. But like, aside from certain movies like Joker that like really lean into in a world, like, like
Right.
that like preface of in a world of like selling you on, you're going on this experience
Trip,
where certain,
escapism.
yeah, and like you bend the rules of life. Like, you can shoot a gas canister in a car and that'll explode. You don't need to like you watch a John Woo movie, they're not reloading guns, you accept it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's just what
Yeah.
it is. Where, if you try that now, you're gonna get, Twitter comments that are like, yeah, this, I was
So
totally
unrealistic.
taken out of, but there's
Yeah.
like this certain like just the production and that vision
Well, shooting
that I
on
thought,
location, I think, is also just a big part of that, and is if shooting on real locations.
Mhm.
Because that's the funny thing. I mean, back in the day, early Hollywood shooting, everything was shot on sets, and then eventually, they were shooting on location. It gave it more realism. But now, films that are supposed to take place in New York are shot in North Carolina or Atlanta or
Yeah,
wherever. And it just it takes you out of that, especially if you're from New York like ourselves, and you recognize. I don't. When you guys watch movies
You know what
shot
the big
that are supposed to be in New York, you're like that train station doesn't go there, and that's not the
no
right
no
street.
the big one for me is whenever I see a movie set in New York and you look down the like a street, right,
and
and it's like a cul-de-sac, or
yeah,
like you can't,
Right.
that's just a limitation of the set, where you're like, come on, in New York I can see all the way across the city. Down if I look down
Hmm.
this block, right, that's just a big pet peeve for me in those
Yeah.
movies. But I
And
think
the
also
fake
to your
alleyways also that don't
yeah,
exist
yeah.
where
in
the
New
fuck are
York.
all these
Yeah.
alleys? Where are all these alleys between buildings? Like, right? And another thing I think I just want to mention, though, I think part of what you're mentioning with New York and Death Wish as compared to like a New York in the Avengers movies is that New York has changed. Right,
Mhm.
like I have family. I have family that my uncle married a woman that's an immigrant. She immigrated, and when her family immigrated to America, the only thing they knew about New York was the movie The Warriors.
Hmm.
What a
so,
first
so
impression.
It's coming back.
so if
Don't
you can
worry.
imagine, so I mean, again, that was a hyper stylized version of New York at the time, but that's not to say that New York back then was a far different beast. Just to your example of Times Square, Where Times Square, remember when we were kids, y'all remember we all went to watch a movie in Times Square, and when I came back, I got roasted by my parents because what are we doing? We were 12 years old going to Times Square. At that time, it was just prostitutes and X-rated film theaters, right? It was drug dealers and drug
Arcades.
addicts,
That's why
right?
we were there, Carlos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Arcades.
Well, also we're gonna
Arcades
Bernie's,
filled
right?
with drug dealers, prostitutes, and child
Dealers,
molesters. Yes.
addicts. Well, so I think there's also something that we also have to like give an excuse. I don't want to say give them a little bit of leeway just because New York isn't the same anymore. And New York, Times Square now is just a tourist trap, right? It doesn't have the same personality anymore. I feel like it's lost something in that personality,
Well, I mean,
for
but
better or worse.
have a personality, right? So it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, it's just a
what
different
is
one.
that? So, like generally these feel like almost like action figures at time. And like, here's character, X in setting X, and there's no like synergy between the setting and the characters that are like creating this world, for me at least. And I like Marvel
Mhm.
movies and I like them. Like I think some of the things like Daredevil or things that like really like kind of lean into a particular trying to establish like a world or whatever, but like, in terms of some of them, it's like, I like Iron Man, but it's like Middle East, terrorist, cave, like that you
Yeah,
have like
yeah,
these
yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
things where they're,
Or Avenger Tower, right? Like way
Yeah.
above the city, right? Where it's like,
and
yeah, I
it
get you.
doesn't feel like that same kind of like cause and effect where
Mhm.
okay, this like you take one of these things out and the whole thing kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
Where like I was watching the behind the scenes of Terminator, and they were saying like, oh, we filmed the whole thing at night, and when you look at that like L.A. tech noir nighttime scenes with like you put two like detectives like that and you get that noir feel and shadows, and there's like those are very specific choices where a lot of things they don't feel like they have
Yeah.
that choice, especially when you talk about like you're on a set that's supposed to be New York but isn't. Like these things are like not leaning into the things that they're trying to be to
Yeah.
make
And I
one video.
and I have two more things too. To your point about atmospheres, shooting on film grain, which I know James Cameron hates,
Does he?
and also to Carlos's point, just about CGI and just I love faces, and that's the reason like Charles Bronson is my favorite actor because he's just got a crazy face. And these days, everyone's filtered or Botoxed up, and I think there's, you can't really connect because they can't emote anymore.
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
I think actors just looked much more interesting back in the day, even probably more so in the '70s, where you had people that just didn't look like traditional like movie stars as you do now, where everyone could be a model or you understand. Oh yeah, of course that person's a film star. So I miss the Christopher Walkens and those character actors that were the stars of movies during that period.
Yeah, I think. What do you think about the like the just the change of the characters themselves? Like, I feel like in the '80s especially, like when it came to action movies, they all like their job was killing. Like, and when I think about like all the
It's
Arnold
glorious.
Schwarzenegger movies,
Yeah,
he's like, their like life, when they do the setup of like your first act stories, like he's a soldier. He like even in
hmm
Total Recall, it's kind of ridiculous that
yeah,
he's a construction
A
worker. Like
corporate.
they even point at that. But like now, I feel like every movie is like, so it's kind of like that Die Hard thing where it's like, okay, here's a normal guy who had a
yeah,
bad day, but he is a cop. Like he's
Hmm.
not just like a computer analyst who's
Yeah,
all of a
yeah.
sudden doing like whatever the case.
Killing everybody.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think I think characters these days are sort of over explained, where you have to like flashback and something traumatic happened to them, and whatever. Where I think you're reminding me of just in '80s movies, there was really maybe there's like one flashback and there's like a training sequence or something like that. But
Training
then you're
montages.
right,
Yes.
but it wasn't sort of like we have to talk about every little thing to explain away any flaws that they have or whatever. Right? There were like if they were a hard nosed cop or something like that. That's just who they were. You didn't have to explain, oh, his partner was
Question it.
killed and whatever, right? Even Die Hard, right? We never really delve into his backstory.
Yeah.
Other than he's a cop and he's
He's a cop.
got problems in his marriage, right? That's
That's
it.
all you need to know.
Yeah. But I feel like if that was made now, he'd start telling stories to Reginald Vell Johnson and explain to him. I know there's a little bit of that in Die Hard,
but not really though. But you're right.
Yeah,
just
really.
the right amount. Just
right.
the right amount.
But it's not like there. I feel like a movie like that was made now. It'd be his journey through Die Hard would be there would be some kind of redemption for something that he fucked up with in his past. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't need that. I don't need that in my Die
Yeah,
Hard.
we don't need that.
Just keep that shit out of my Die Hard,
Just
please.
throw the guy out the window. Yeah. No, throw him off the roof. Yeah.
Die Hard. Like, you don't have to do any more selling at this point. And I do think like one of the things with this time period is there was no shame of solving all problems through violence. Like I feel like I'm not bashing it because I do like the Marvel movies, I just want to say, but aside there, like so many of the movies, like these people are like smart or they do something else while kicking ass, right? Like you have to be like a scientist, like, you put like Peter Parker and Iron Man, like they're both geniuses. And then you have another guy in there who could do something else. Like the in the 80s, 90s, like and 70s, they like the thing that I forgot because of my rewatch of Death Wish is he's an architect. Like, and I know he's like a former, like he was a soldier at some point, but they're just like, yeah, man, he's an architect. He doesn't have like he's not outsmarting anyone. He's not really good with electronics where you can pick it, a lock or whatever. He's just like, look, man, I'm gonna do it with a gun. I have an issue in this city, and I know how to solve it. And
that starts happening in Death Wish 3 onward. He becomes like a MacGyver. But the everyman quality of some of those films are also great. So that's why vigilante movies were so popular in after Death Wish, because it was that number one, they were easy to make, and I think a lot of people could relate to them because of the crime.
There's a lot of crime in the city at that time too.
But do you think like, because there's like depending on like the news source or where people live, there is an uptick in crime or like at least a perception of it. But the thing that I find like wild is like I don't think they could do that level of film now. Like you see the backlash with like your Joker or like there's a lot of memes about like Batman. Like, people are like, why isn't he using his money to fund, like
the homeless, right? Yeah.
You can start a foundation or something.
Yeah, and again, like, and just in terms of like, I think that there was a lot less of a need to be
for like a message, right?
Or to like socially responsible. With stuff where
I don't need to go to a movie to learn a lesson about life or again salvation, right? Like, I just go there to have a good time. Like, show me some over the top kills, right? Although to your point, I think. Again, I don't know if this is an outlier, but I was just thinking about how you're saying we don't need a redemption story for everything. And I started to just now think about Rambo 1, right? And in Rambo 1, there's some deeper messages there, right? There was an alternative ending where he dies at the end, right? But they had a couple of flashbacks of him being tortured in Vietnam. And then there's a speech at the end about how he feels out of place in society after war. That had all the emotional weight of things that we kind of see today in films, but there wasn't as much exposition. I feel like you just kind of got it, and I'm not sure if that's an outlier for the time or what, but I do feel like because what we're saying too is like I'm almost getting the tone from kind of the way the conversation is steering that like there wasn't any kind of intellectual, moral, social value in those movies, but I think there was. It just wasn't as ham-fisted. It wasn't as like, shove it down your throat. I don't know.
Well, I think a great example is They Live, right? There was a lot of social commentary in that movie, but I watched it as a kid, not knowing anything about politics and not understanding the world, and it was just entertaining. You watch it now.
There's a huge fight scene with Roddy Piper.
Yeah, right. That was like 10 minutes, right? But you watch it now and you understand, okay, this is a commentary on whatever, but it's also not over the top. It doesn't take over the movie. And if it's there and you
Yeah.
get it, that's great. If not, you can still enjoy it for on a very
Exactly.
superficial level. And I think that's what was great about those 80s films compared to now, where they're making the movie to convey a message. And back in the day, they were just making a movie to entertain. And if there was a message, that was secondary.
Even better.
Well, I mean, the thing that I was saying wasn't that there was no message with it. It's just the more of the audiences look at not even the movie anymore, right? So like, it's not about Carlos. You made a movie with a message. It's it's not the message of the movie. It's you, writer. Why are you like what is this movie telling to the audiences now? And they escape like what the movie is. So while a lot of those movies had that commentary, or like, I'm sure there was some level of like backlash or criticism of like the death wish and like the portrayal of gang life or whatever. But like, think about how many like think pieces that would have now, or boycotts of like, well, why are they portraying everyone in this way? And then it's not about that movie. It's not about the characters. It's less about the themes. It's more like you have to defend like like a Quentin Tarantino who's like, oh, my black characters say the N word, and it's
A million
like,
times.
no, it's not your characters, it's you,
Who wrote it?
writing this. And you're like, what do we kind of talk? And you even take like your Marty Scorsese's, and there's a way later discussion about the person making it, and there's a whole thing about him dropping a couple of N-bombs in Taxi Driver, where you watch, like, I watched the movie and I'm like, that's a racist character.
Yeah, not a racist movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Not this whole.
Yeah.
I've noticed that with younger audiences where they really can't really take apart the film and what if the film is trying to say something. So if there's a racist character in a movie, the film is racist, or that was the intention of the filmmaker, is to make a racist movie, as opposed to understanding, yes, this is the character and he is flawed, and it's not so black. And that's the great thing about, I think, older films, is that there was more of a gray area where the characters lived, versus now that if they're good guys, they got to be kind of perfect. If they're
They're
bad guys,
paragons.
yeah. I think only TV now really explores more the anti-hero, but you don't see as much in a film.
Yeah, I think it's that level of context, right? That like gives you, like, you have to understand why Tony's, he's not all bad, like within that time, the hour and a half, there's like that meme about like how shows are kind of talking now. It's like they use an example called like Surf Vampire, and they're like, if a show Surf Vampire comes out, it's 5 episodes of this, dude like getting a surfboard, making his way to the beach. He doesn't start surfing until the last
the
episode,
midpoint of the season.
and you're like, man, I just want to watch this dude surf. Episode 1 to episode 10, and that's one of the things I like about like that time period. Like, you can do your flashbacks, you can allude to it, but I feel like it very often felt like a moment. Like when you watch the movie, like you're watching a moment of this person's life, which is like a fairly contained story and not like a 3-hour epic, which has its place, right? I love my Godfathers and Godfather 2, but not every movie needs to be like, we open on his birth.
Well, that reminds me of the Halloween remake, where they spent like the first like 40 minutes exploring the Rob Zombie one, where the first 40-50 minutes are exploring the backstory of Michael Myers, and you see Michael Myers as a kid for like the bulk of that, and it's like that just ruined the movie for me. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see like an 8-year-old kid wearing a Michael Myers mask killing people. It doesn't make any sense. Like in the first movie, if you remember the opening scene, point of view, the only time you see the kid is when the mask is taken off, and then we just jump ahead, right? And then Michael Myers is an adult and he escapes the insane asylum. We don't really delve into like his character, his motivation, his childhood. That's just too much.
Yeah. Do you think
isn't it enough to be like, can't we just have a crazy bastard killing people? Like, isn't that enough? I don't need to know why he's going through that. All I need to know is if I'm in the vicinity and I see a weird dude hanging out from the bushes, I need to get out of there. And that's all I really need to know.
I think that's the great thing about, again, older films. There's more ambiguity. and they trust the viewer is going to come up with their own sort of ideas and hypotheses, as opposed to like spoon feeding them all the information.
Mhm.
Yeah, they were saying. I watched an editing of a documentary about editing, and there was a like at some point, the 40s or 50s, where someone decided to take a leap between they like the idea of, let's say there's a scene, you are going up to work, you drive to work. They were like, do you need to show the person putting the car in park, closing the door, walking in, or can you just have them put the
Show
car
them
in
around.
park and then show the next scene they're in their office? And I think it's that kind of like, you don't need to write everything out, and that ambiguity. I don't know if it's like like we're speaking of like there was just more faith in the audience to be on the same wavelength and like understand things in the same way. So maybe there's a fear of like having that ambiguity of like we don't want people to root for Tony Soprano
Mhm.
because he's doing that, like there's like an over explanation. But yeah, I think that I do like that, like less is more, fill
Mhm.
You
in the
know,
blanks kind of.
it's funny that actually brings up a point back around to the practical effects thing, where one of I think the most interesting things and one of my favorite movies is Psycho, right? And in the scene, there's the famous scene in Psycho, right in the shower, right, and the silhouette and the stabbing, and in that movie, you never actually see Janet Leigh get stabbed, right? It's literally just you see the stabbing motion, you see her kind of responding, and then you just see the pool of blood in the tub, and your brain fills in, the rest, and
Mhm.
your brain is going to do a way better job than any practical effects person or any CGI could possibly do, right? And again, I think it's kind of trusting in the audience that they don't, like you said, need to be spoon fed everything. Sometimes your brain can fill in those gaps and do a way better job of it than anything on film or written down could do.
And you also
That's
had Hitchcock as a director, so
Well, yeah, I
that
mean,
helps. Yeah, but I
yeah.
think that the quality of filmmaking certainly was at a different standard back into those days. Not to say there are no good filmmakers now, but I think the craft was something to
it's
be
different.
just admired at a different level.
Yeah, I think just overall you did feel like you were seeing the auteurs
Mm-hmm.
a part of, like your Reservoir Dogs, like, when he's getting his ear cut off and the camera turns so you don't see it, and then it comes back and it's just kind of
Yeah.
gone. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it did have a level of intent that I feel is like not
Yeah, because
as.
and I think because audiences today, younger people especially, they don't really, when they watch a film, it's sort of it's on and they're checking their phones and they're just kind of listening and it's not like glued to the screen. So they those details, certain shots, certain moments, I feel that are taken for granted now, um, and people just don't appreciate because they're not paying attention.
So with that, I think one thing that we were talking about during this time is, which was really interesting because during the 70s and early 80s, there to see a movie, you either had to see it on TV or you had to see it in theaters. The video game VHS changed a lot of how people consume TV, especially now with streaming. Even physical media is not as around and like as important to collectors or like a new generation of collectors. I still like physical media.
Me
Telly, from
too.
your background, seems that you are very much a fan of physical media. So we talked about showing off some things that are in our collection, which are some of our favorite movies or things that we own. So I think we can go Telly, Carlos, me of show off a couple of
Yeah.
must-haves or something
Oh,
that you
okay. So
like.
I just picked three that I consider favorites, personal
Okay.
favorites. And I think when we started talking about this podcast, I thought that was interesting to sort of like understand what the criteria is for like what makes make what makes a movie a personal favorite. It for me, it's like how many times you've watched it, how many times you own it, what you remember from it. So these are my three that I've been watching for like 3 decades. So in no particular order, I'll share. Okay, so number one, uh, King of New York, directed by Abel Ferrara, starring Christopher Walken. Love this
Y'all got
movie.
lazy.
Yeah.
Y'all got lazy out there while we starved.
Yeah, love this movie. I quote it
It's
all
my
the
time.
time. Yes.
It's my a great movie.
A second one is
Great
Henry,
think right.
Portrait of a Serial Killer. Love this film. John
I don't know
McNaughton
that movie.
directed it. Michael Rooker's sort of breakout performance. This is one of the
Really?
films that prompted the
Write
need
that down.
for an NC-17 rating.
What
Wow.
was the name
Because
of it again? I'm ready.
Henry,
One
Portrait
more
of a
time.
Serial Killer.
Henry?
Is that one NC-17 or?
This was released, I think it was released as an NC-17 because this was an independent film shot on a shoestring. This has a very interesting background because a producer wanted to make a slasher movie, paid somebody a couple of $1,000, like I think like $80,000, go off and make a slasher movie. And then he made a film like this, which is more indie, more art house. And they were like, I can't release this crap. So he took the film and started having it play the festival circuit, and then it got noticed, it got picked up. But when it was time to release it, they were like, "This is too intense to be an R, but it's not a porno movie, so it doesn't make sense to call it an X. But we can't release it unrated because theaters won't play it." So that was
Wow.
where they started saying like, "Okay, we need another rating."
Rating.
Yeah. So that's Henry. And then my last one, I think we referenced the first one, but it's Psycho 2. Used to
Oh.
watch this like crazy back in the day. It was always on TV, and follow up to obviously the original Psycho, starring Anthony Perkins, directed by Richard Franklin, a Hitchcock a protege and Australian filmmaker, and just love this film. The mystery around it, the story is a thriller. It's not a typical sequel where Norman Bates just gets out of the insane asylum and starts killing again. It's really about a guy who's kind of having a mental breakdown.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe in a later pod, it'd be interesting to hear some of your thoughts on the TV show. That
Okay.
I thought was really
Show was
interesting
okay.
take on
I like the
on the
show,
character.
but no one can compare it with Anthony Perkins.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, he's so great at. He has this. I think John Lithgow does it too, where he can flip a switch from unassuming and not scary to like menacing, like
Yes.
like a light switch, which is great acting, but also it can be very visceral too when you see it happen, right? So yeah, he's amazing. Those are great choices. So for me, I think again, no particular order, but I'm going to start at the top. I'm picking my favorite movie of all time, Terminator 2. I think now I didn't say that it was I thought the best movie of all time, right? I think, academically, artistically, maybe that's The Godfather or something. There's an argument for it possibly being the best action movie of all time. Either that or maybe Die Hard. But for me personally, it was a question of right time, right place. I was like exactly the target audience for this movie when it came out. I was 12 years old. It completely blew my mind. And till this day, anytime it's on television, network television, no matter where it is in the movie, I will sit there and watch it. I remember a couple of years ago, I was on a vacation with my girlfriend at the time. We were in Puerto Rico. It was our last day before we had to fly away, and we were having breakfast, waiting to head down to the beach. And Terminator 2 was on one of the local channels, WAPA, Univision, one of those channels. And it was like from the middle of the movie, and my girlfriend wanted to go downstairs, and I was like, no, I'm not leaving. She was so angry at me because not only did she know that I had already seen this movie a million times, but now I'm watching it on Univision, which means it's got the edited version with everything kind of edited out. There's commercials, and it's in Spanish. Right. So again, for me, it's a personal favorite. It's
Okay.
one of my favorite
I got to
movies.
add a little backstory here. When we first started hanging out in junior high school, and our friend Carlos, fellow podcast host, we used to hang out at his place, and he had T2 like on loop in his house. So I think we literally watched it several times a week, like during those
Hmm.
years.
That was
Yeah,
our.
he even had the soundtrack.
And I
We used to
think,
work out to the
yeah,
tin tin
right,
tin.
right. So I
Tin,
think
tin,
because of
tin.
that didn't make my top list because I got to a point where I just got sick of it for a while because I saw it so many times.
Really?
Not sick of it because
It's
Blasphemy.
don't like it, but just seen it way too many times because I saw that in the
we
theater
gotta
too.
catch
That was one of my favorite in movie theater going experiences was sneaking into T2. I forgot what movie I saw before that. sneaking into T2, watching it in a packed theater, and just experiencing some of those special effects for the first time in a crowded
You know,
audience.
it's actually kind of ironic that I picked that as well, because just talking about practical effects, right? And
Yeah,
here's a movie that was really one of the first films that, you know, introduced CG in a believable and good way. Although I would argue, I think even then at the time watching it, I still was like, that looks amazing. I've never seen anything like this. This is great, but it still looks kind of fake. You know what I mean?
but
Mhm.
also to the movie's credit, and it's my favorite movie of all time.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Just straight up, like no caveats, no asterisks. Got my
Yeah. Yeah.
VHS up there. But it's also a great has some really good practical effects too, like him ripping the arm off, and
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, like by the end where he's all beat up, like maybe not so much like, you know, in terms of like what the makeup is and the action scenes of,
Yeah.
you know, this
There's a
Yeah.
helicopter flying into the back of a
oh
van.
Yeah.
They
no,
did that
yes,
Well,
on
yeah.
the highway. They
Well,
did
I
that.
think I saw some videos on YouTube, and they said the amount of actual CGI is extremely minimal. It's less than you actually think in that
Really.
film, because they
You know,
achieved some of
and
those effects practically.
mm, one of the things that I think is one of the greatest disservices in all of film history was, you know, initially, because Arnold was the bad guy in Terminator 1, right? If you watch that movie from the context of not knowing that he's the hero in this movie, Cameron did an amazing job of setting up. You don't know which one of these is trying to kill John Connor, which one is trying to help him. It's not till the moment that Arnold says, "Get down," right? And it didn't really occur to me that that was a thing. I read later that, you know,
Yeah.
it wasn't his choice to put him on the art, right? He wanted to keep that a secret. But now I'm in this thing where I'm watching a lot of reaction videos on YouTube. So some of these people who are going, they're kids, right? They're, you know, we're talking 18, 19-year-olds who had never seen Terminator 2 or seen one. And so they don't know the context. And then when that scene happens, just watching their brains explode because, oh wow,
Yeah.
he's the good guy, he's there to save him,
Yeah, that
like,
was supposed to
you
be a
know, like,
surprise. Yeah, but I remember being a kid and leading up to the movie and watching like Entertainment Tonight, and it was very obvious that he was like
he's the
the
hero.
hero. So
yeah,
that
Yeah,
they
it's a
ruined
shame.
that.
high-fiving a 10-year-old, and you're like, all right, something tells me he's not the villain.
um, so second one I picked is Memento. Again, I think, in my opinion, Memento is my favorite Nolan film, and it's actually the first DVD that I purchased. I got an Xbox when I was in college, and it had a DVD player in it. So that's how I had a DVD, and so I went to Blockbuster. Somebody recommended it to me. I watched the movie. Went at the end when the final thing happens, and you've kind of put the story together. I was so mind blown that I immediately went to Blockbuster and bought it. And so it's the first DVD that I own. You know, we can go into that for hours. The movie's told backwards, right? You know, it's like a scene will happen and then it'll stop, and then all of a sudden the next scene will be what got you into the previous scene. Storytelling like I'd never seen. Acting's amazing. You know, it's just a goat for me. And I think it was at the time where Shyamalan had just come out with Sixth Sense, or maybe it was a little bit before Sixth Sense. So like the surprise ending thing was relatively new. So yeah, I just remember my mind being blown by that one.
So a Memento for me, that illustrates what I was saying about how do you gauge what is a favorite, because I saw that movie, loved the movie, completely blew me away, but I've only seen it once since it came out.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, I would
Yeah.
say I say it holds up. Again, I'm a guy who watches it, who've seen it a million times, so maybe my opinion is a little skewed, but I definitely would recommend watching it. And I'm a huge Nolan fan, and until this day, I think Memento is the first Nolan movie I ever saw, and it's my favorite of all of them. So, then again, it's kind of hard to pick from the group, but another favorite of mine, I'm going to go back to the well with Schwarzenegger, right? Predator. What do we need to say? Get to the chopper, right? The
Uh,
whole, you know, them in the jungle, the Carl Weathers, you know, handshake, the very beginning of the movie.
You son of a
Um,
bitch.
yeah.
you said it right again. Again, this is an example too of practical effects. I don't know what it's called. Um, what they were using for like laser blasts, you know, back in the day, like, you know, Star Wars, you know, the trench run was done with miniatures, but the laser blast, that's not really CG. I don't know if they drew it in or whatever. I wouldn't consider
Yeah, I
that
think it was
like
rotoscoped in,
CG.
I think.
Is that
Yeah.
okay? And it's just, I mean, I don't think I need to say much about Predator, right? Like, it's a great ride. It's a small cast.
A
Again,
great
it's one of
cat.
those
Yeah.
ideas. It's a
Yeah.
great Jesse the Body Ventura.
Yeah, like
you
everyone
know,
is
One thing I
jacked.
never understood about Predator is how like that cast didn't go on to become like bigger stars, like Carl Weathers, Jesse Ventura, because they were so great in that movie. But it just kind of went on to do like nothing. I mean, Carl Weathers had Action Jackson, but Jesse Ventura just and
you're
did
right.
some B movies and then kind of became a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, yeah. And then what I actually saw was I forget her name, Maria. I guess, of course, it's Maria. She's a
Oh
Hispanic in the
yeah, she
movie.
was
Of
in
course, her name is
Blue
Maria.
Beetle,
She
right?
was in Blue Beetle. Yeah, she was in Blue Beetle. And it was one of those things where I'm watching, I'm like, where do I know her from? Somewhere. Then all of a sudden in my head, it was like, and today, this summer, it grows very hot.
Yeah.
I was like,
So
oh, that's where
just
that's
very
where it's from.
quickly, what do you think of Predator 2?
Content
Um,
Andy.
so I don't think it's a great movie, but I think it's a really fun movie.
Okay.
And what Gary Busey, like, come on, man, you gotta love it, right? And again, what's his name is getting too old for this shit, right?
Yeah, Danny
Still,
Glover. Yeah.
Danny Glover's getting too old for this shit. So Predator 2 was good, and I don't know what's really been happening with these attempts to keep on trying to bring it back. I don't think anything has captured kind
No.
of the glory, except for the most recent one with the
Prey?
Native American, which is called Prey. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that.
Hmm.
And I really hope that. I mean, I just think as an iconic character, the visor, the braids, like, it's just again ingrained in my brain as one of the iconic silhouettes. Right? I was looking at something where they were talking about his armor. Right? His armor makes absolutely no sense. He's not covered really anywhere. But the point is, he's alien, so he's dangerous, and his technology is so far advanced. If we saw him in a suit of armor, it wouldn't make him as badass.
Mhm.
But you get to see that reptilian skin behind the fishnets. So yeah, those are my three.
That's a solid 3. I feel like it's funny. I was going through my movies and I have Predator 1 and 2, and I was like, I'm only gonna keep it to. I felt like there was probably an Arnold Schwarzenegger pick on there, but I do think that's like one of my favorites as well from my collection. We're going with Taxi Driver. I'm not sure if this is a Criterion. No, it's not. But the packaging on this is really nice. It's like one of those like not steel, but like you get a nice booklet. You get some really good artwork in there. The movie itself is one of my favorites. I love movies that depict a time and depict the city
Period piece.
being New York born and raised, like, and not from the, I was born in 84, so miss this. So this was like a little bit more of an eye-opening experience into what the city looked like, some of the politics involved, and really just that
Yeah.
kind of you do get a fair amount of backstory and lead up. This is like a character piece of someone who's hasn't who's had enough, but with the context of it, it's like one of those things where plot, character, and setting goes so well together that if you remove any one of those elements, and it's like kind of what we're talking a little bit about Predator, right? Like Predator is the character, and then you like, what do you feel about 2 when you pluck him into City, right?
City.
What do you feel about the other ones where you drop him in another planet, aliens? It's like you're messing with those 3 different things. But with Taxi Driver, it was just one of those things where it was like the cast, the story, everything like really coming together to create a vision. And in terms of like cyberpunk noir, like fluorescent lights, of like, it made Manhattan feel very different than other directors'
Yeah.
portrayals of Manhattan. And you put that with the soundtrack of like the smooth jazz over some of the scenes, but then you have like that menacing like drone at the end where he's like has his finger, like, there's so much to latch onto within the movie. And the thing that I like about it is like, what you're saying with Terminator, if it comes on at any point, you start it 20 minutes in, he's such a different Robert De Niro, Travis Bickle from 20 minutes in than if you catch it an hour in, hour and a half in. And I just think it's a really great ride, but also has a lot of social commentary, but is just really like, doesn't beat you over the head with it, but is like what you take
Yeah.
from it Is he a vigilante? Is a city fucked up? Just a lot of rewatch value for me. So I've seen it a lot.
That's one of my favorite movies, and that almost made my list. It's just that I haven't revisited in a while because I did go to like the 30th or I forgot 40th anniversary screening a couple of years ago that the New York Film Festival was hosting. I got a little miniature like taxi that was given away to all the people that went. But yeah, I haven't watched it in a while. But that's certainly one of my favorite movies for exactly those reasons. Just the tone, the shock value in towards the ending, and Harvey Keitel, one of my favorite actors as well, and just you know, and just how ugly. And that's the movie is not afraid to get ugly, and that's what I loved about that film. Just like some of the characters are despicable, the things that he does are bizarre, and it's not warm and fuzzy.
One of the things that we kind of getting back to the whole character of New York City, that when I'm thinking back to movies in the 80s, I just remember a lot of movies depicting the city with steam rising from the streets. I don't know where all this steam is coming from or what it was. I guess maybe it's supposed to be like a visual note to go against like the neon lights, creates like shadows, but I always remember
cool.
like
hell yeah.
it just looks
it's
cool,
the same reason why the streets are always like wet, because it just looks nicer. There's no it doesn't make any sense.
There's no real reason.
Yeah.
But even today when I walk around the city and I see steam coming from one of those vents, it still occurs to me like, what is this steam for?
Yeah.
Wait, nothing steam powered in New York. What is this coming from, or what is it about?
I'm sure there's a practical reason, but I just like to believe someone's like, we need to make the city look fucking bad.
Awesome.
Get me one of those big orange tubes because we're shooting smoke out.
There's toxic waste in the sewers, according to Jason Takes Manhattan. Yeah.
Makes sense.
My man shot the fair one with Jason. He shot the fair one with Jason. That's the gangsterest thing I've ever seen. He went out like a champ.
It didn't go well, but
all right, let's go back to Dash's number 2. I know it's
sorry.
A lot of time. I don't have. It's a part of a box set. So this is the Alien anthology, which is up to Resurrection. So it's the 4. But of the 4, surprisingly not going to call out Ridley Scott's Alien, but going with James Cameron's Alien, because I love Alien. Love the horror aspect of it, but one of the things that I really like about, and we're kind of talking a little bit about this with Terminator, is just the same premise, but just updated, stakes upped. The players are changed, with this like just elevated everything.
Space Marines? What?
Ship's bigger. Ripley's back, Space Marines in this, and in turn, like the one thing that I love, and I'm realizing it now saying this, is I love Inaugural. Like I love the world of it, and Ridley Scott did an amazing job of just like introducing new tech, a different look of space. The whole space miners, I think it's such a dope. I'm pretty sure he didn't come up with that, but just his portrayal of these like blue collar staff of people who are there, they're cryogenically frozen until they have to work. The introduction of the Space Marines, I think, is one of the best movie ideas or just storytelling ideas. Like I like that, he brought it back with Avatar. Can't believe the top 2, grossing movies all time have Space Marines, but talking about Aliens was just like the guns they used, having a pretty diverse cast of the Marines, of like what it looks like, them doing all of the tropes. And it felt like a mashup of things that I love, of like Platoon, Apocalypse Now, sci-fi, horror, the original Alien, and then I came to this after seeing and loving Terminator. So you have your Michael Biehn in there. You have your,
of course, you gotta love the Beanster.
Comedic relief.
Yeah.
I really
came over, man.
Speaking of Bill Paxton, I think that's one of the reasons I love Aliens, is because the comedic relief in that film that is,
so
and also Lance Henriksen, another like favorite actor of mine, just being awesome in that film.
It's just
I also want to give a lot of credit to Cameron, because when making a sequel, it would have been very easy for him to just try to duplicate the same
Mhm.
claustrophobic, you're stuck in a small space with something that's hunting you. And he was able to take that same idea, still a small space, but I'm not going to make this a psychological horror, a thriller. I'm James Cameron. I'm going to make a fucking action movie.
Yeah.
Right. And so, he was willing, he wasn't held to the constraints of the genre of the first one. He made it uniquely his own, and home run. Bravo.
And the thing that's interesting with Aliens and Predator is that kind of like you have badasses up against fear.
The ultimate.
The ultimate like predator kind of, no pun intended, but like situation of like guns and brawn can only get you so far.
Mhm.
And it's just I think like Aliens is such a great mix of a lot of things working together to create a really memorable story. So that's my
And both of those monsters were outsmarted too. They weren't like flat out killed. They were outsmarted.
Yeah.
Right. It was literally the camouflage in the trap in Predator, or sucking out the airlock in Aliens. So to that point about you can't do it with bronze necessarily. I mean, great examples. Yeah.
My last movie that I wanted to show off, which I think perfectly encapsulates that. And back to Arnold, it is Total Recall. This movie, I hate for Arnold to be in two of like probably,
but it's Arnold.
five.
It's Arnold.
Total Recall is a movie that is way better than it deserves, that it has any business being.
To be. Absolutely.
So for me, it was one of those movies that was very, just going to like the ending. I think like, your last frame and what you walk away from is what you take away a lot of times.
Kiss me now before you wake up.
That was the inception of its time. Like, what is this? They left enough little seeds throughout the movie for what, it is a dream. It's not a dream. The action scenes are crazy. What the director was able to do, and just the like
Verhoeven, right?
Yeah, Verhoeven.
Yeah.
To do with, I think it was in Australia, of like creating that like train sequence, and where he's walking through and you see the x-ray and the skeleton. And this is like, I felt like this was one of the smartest action movies of that time, because it has everything. It justifies all the cool shit that Arnold's doing. So he's killing henchmen, but he has these implants, and just the amount of thinking that you do with the world that it sets up and the rules that it sets up, and little stuff that they added in to create the future, like the receptionist painting her nails and she just taps it, and they go there at the Johnny Cab, the
which we're looking at now almost.
The video phones. And one of the things that's really great is like, the red pill. This was like probably one of the first movies that had that idea of, the dream. And there's been movies after it, like Paprika, Inception, Matrix, to really use that theme of like, dreaming or being awake. But, pairing that with everything that this is like prime. This is a little, I would say, like before Terminator 2, but like Arnold made his rounds, his Conans, his Predators, Kindergarten Cops, Twins. Like this, I feel like is, aside from Terminator 2, is
him
like
in full form.
apex.
Well, that's a film. That's just an example of a director's film, right? Because only Verhoeven could have made that movie the way it was. And I never even bothered to see the remake, because that's a movie you love it as much because it's a Verhoeven film, as much as for the story and Arnold and anything else. And Michael Ironside also. I love Michael Ironside. I always thought it was
Ronnie Cox as well.
Ronnie Cox.
Be home in time for cornflokes.
Yes.
The one-liners are so great. Consider that a divorce.
Yes.
Right? I got 5 kids to feed. Like, some of the best one-liners. I think also part of the world building that makes this so great is we have to give it to the fact that it's based on a Philip K. Dick book, right? And so I think, although having looked at the book, it doesn't really, it's very loose. And actually, interesting enough, the character from oh man, I'm blanking on the Tom Cruise movie. That was a Spielberg Minority Report. I think it's supposed to be the same, the same character, right?
So like in the same world.
Yeah. I think that the reason for some of that really well thought out. Like, you're right, it's Verhoeven 100%, but the framework that he had to work with was also really interesting and dope. And again, it's kind of one of those things where it's the confluence of nerd sci-fi, but also kind of like grindhouse, violent mutants,
Mhm.
right? And a girl with three boobs, right? Like, it's just such a great bringing together of different genres that are. I think we were the perfect, focus group for those movies. Like, they made that movie for us. And you're absolutely right. That movie is such a banger.
No, it is, and I think like when in terms of like what did the director bring versus what's in the source material. When you watch that next to Starship Troopers and you watch that next to RoboCop, you see a lot of that. Going back to like directors putting and writers putting messages in there. There's a lot of like consumerism themes.
Commercials.
Recall has a jingle. Like it became this like why go on vacation and
Recall, recall,
yeah, this whole
recall.
like them watching. There's a couple of scenes where he's like watching the news, and you have your talking heads and the rebels, and there's like a whole political thing, which I doubt. I haven't read the book, but having seen the remake, you start to see some of the differences and similarities between them and what they drop, and you just see someone, a director who's really has a vision and a tone and an ability to tell a story that's memorable. And one of my favorite movies. I might even put it in my top 10 of films as well. So we got
Did you see
Aliens, the Total
did
Recall.
you see, did you see the Rick and Morty episode this season with all the Quados?
No, did a new season start?
Oh yeah, it's done already. They did the whole Rick and Morty season with a sound alike for Morty or whatever. And there's an episode where they go to a world and it's Quados.
So
That's all I'll say. You have to watch
okay,
it.
I know what I'm doing the rest of my weekend. Telly, I have a cat, and my cat's name's Quado.
It's Quado.
Oh, okay.
I love this movie. So
Is the remake worth seeing? I never even
no,
considered watching it. So okay.
Not really.
it's not. And the thing is that's kind of weird is like they'll do some stuff that
But
was explained by them being on Mars,
Hmm.
but they don't go on Mars, but they still threw it in anyway because you can tell you were like, if you're making a Total Recall, you have to have such and such
certain things.
scene, and you're watching it like, why is this in the movie? It's not worth it.
Okay.
I would say.
There's just a side anecdote. I love this movie so much that I had just started working at my previous job, and it was the summertime, and it was one of those really really hot summers that the city required all office buildings to lower the AC
I know it is.
because of consumption. You know where this is going. It was steaming hot in the office. It was so hot. And we're in the conference room, and the CEO is like, "Hey guys, I'm real sorry, but it's not up to us, the AC." And I just couldn't help myself. I scream out, "That's enough, Cohagen! Give these people air!" And like half the people got it. The other half were looking at us like it was crazy. I freaking love that movie, man.
Now you know exactly who you should be friends with. Just
Exactly.
and
Yeah, I like half of you guys. The rest of you guys suck.
so overall, impressed by your choices. I think talking to you guys, this sounds like the perfect assemble of movie watchers. Of I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys about more and more movies, stuff that we like, and also there's a bunch of movies that I haven't seen. So I know that we're going to talk about like nominating movies, and each one of us kind of picking a movie that we'll watch and talk about. And so I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
seeing movies that you guys like, talking about movies that I like, and
Absolutely.
seeing what people think of what we like. And hopefully they'll chime in the comments and talk about stuff that maybe they like these movies as much as we do. Maybe they know some sort of tips. Maybe they read the Philip K. Dick story that remember it for you wholesale, and they can shed a little bit of light on how much of how faithful Total Recall
It is. Yeah, for
actually
sure.
is. So before we sign off, any parting words for anybody, from anybody, or
I mean, I think obviously the same old like, comment, and subscribe. If you like this content, we'd love for you to join the conversation with us. Put some comments in there. Throw in a couple of movies you think that would be good conversation starters for us. It's a burgeoning community, and we really want to get our hands in there and just talk films. Like, this was really all about. We love movies, especially movies of this genre. Come have a chat with us.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, give
Telly?
us some suggestions. I know I listen to a lot of film podcasts. I love it when I stumble upon one that's digging into a film that I love that's maybe a little bit more obscure. So yeah, just don't be afraid to give us something left field, and also would love to discover like a hidden gem from that period that maybe none of us have seen.
Absolutely. So we hope you tune in to the next episode where we're going to be talking about
Episode
Commando.
one.
Episode 1 officially. This is
Yes.
episode 0. And on episode 1, we're going to be talking Commando, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, directed by Mark L. Lester. So make sure you tune in to episode 1 of Shoot, Punch, Kick. We'll see you then.
Punch, kick.
Let's do it.